Hey guys, today we're in part 4 of our 5-part series on the book of Jonah from the Old Testament. And today, as we look at Jonah chapter 4, we're going to look at what I would consider to be the most embarrassing chapter in the entire Bible, because we're going to see a grown man, namely Jonah, totally throwing a tantrum in front of God. Here's the first thing we're going to learn. It's embarrassing when your attitude toward God gets exposed. That's exactly what happened to Jonah. And it was because of God's change of plans. Remember in the last chapter, we saw that God decided not to destroy Nineveh. And this greatly upset Jonah. He became really angry. So he complained to the Lord about it. He said, "Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That's why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You're eager to turn back from destroying people." So he says, "Just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive if what I predicted will not happen." Aren't you embarrassed, Jonah? I can't believe that you would be complaining to God right now after all of the stuff that he's done for you. I mean, think about the pivot in Jonah's prayers. Compare his prayer from chapter 2 with his prayer here in chapter 4. In chapter 2, he's at rock bottom. And don't we all do this when we're at rock bottom? We get really humble. We get really contrite toward God. We say, "God, I'll do anything." You know, Jonah says, "Hey, I'm gonna make good on my vows. I'm gonna go to Nineveh after all." And then he goes there. And now here he is in chapter 4, and his attitude completely changes toward God. Now he's complaining about God's mercy and graciousness and compassion towards somebody else. And really, it's embarrassing how little we understand God's mercy. In Jonah 4, verse 4, the Lord replied, "Is it right, Jonah, for you to be angry about this?" God is going to challenge Jonah's understanding of his mercy. Remember, Jonah had just experienced all this mercy and grace and forgiveness toward himself, but he doesn't think the Ninevites are worthy of it. Somehow he thinks he's earned God's grace and the Ninevites didn't. It reminds me of the parable of the landowner from Matthew chapter 20, where Jesus is talking about some workers who came early and some workers who came late, but the landowner paid all of them the same amount. And so he answered one of them, one of the guys who was complaining about this. He said, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I'm kind to others?" Now, I have to admit that this passage really gets under my skin. I hate this story. A part of me, at least, hates the story where Jesus is trying to help us to understand the undeserved mercy and grace of God. And really, the truth is, nobody deserves his mercy and grace. Not Jonah, not the Ninevites, and not you or me. And so it's embarrassing how we tend to care more about our own comfort than we even do about people, living, breathing human beings. And this is how the book of Jonah ends. God is going to teach Jonah one more lesson. It says in verse 5 that he went out to the east side of the city and made a shelter to sit under as he waited to see what would happen to the city. He was still hoping for that fireworks show. He thought maybe God would still go all Sodom and Gomorrah on Nineveh after all. But nothing happened to the city, and instead the Lord arranged for a leafy plant to grow there, and soon it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun. And so this eased his discomfort, and Jonah was very grateful for the plant. And apparently he fell asleep there and spent the night under that plant. But then it goes on to say that God also arranged for a worm. And the next morning at dawn, the worm ate through the stem of the plant so that it withered away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint and wished to die. So he said, "Death is certainly better than living like this." And then God brings the lesson home to Jonah. He says, "Is it right for you to be angry because the plant died?" And this is so embarrassing how Jonah responds. He said, "Yes, even angry enough to die. And then the Lord said this, you feel sorry about the plant, though you did nothing to put it there. It came quickly, it died quickly. But he says, Nineveh has more than 120,000 people living in spiritual darkness, not to mention all the animals. Shouldn't I feel sorry for such a great city? And that's how the book of Jonah ends. It just ends on this cliffhanger. And it really causes us to ask a question. What makes us sad? What do we grieve about, like deep down? Jonah, by the end of the story, it shows how shallow he is. He is sad about losing the stuff that gave him comfort. God is sad about human beings. God is sad about actual people. And he's actually sad about the animals as well. That's what matters to God. But it's not what matters to us. I mean, be honest, as American Christians, we have all of our creature comforts. And let's be honest, our pursuit of God a lot of times boils down to pursuing things that make us comfortable, the stuff that makes us happy. This is the lesson of Jonah. The lesson of Jonah is to say, are we sad when we consider the people around us in our culture, even as the culture is going to hell in a handbasket? Do we still feel sorry for these people? Do we recognize that they deserve the grace of God just as much as we do? Which is to say, none of us deserve it at all, but that's just how God works. He's gracious and compassionate and slow to get angry, and he cares about everybody. And he wants everybody to come to a saving knowledge of his Son.